Good morning, everyone. And thank you all so much for being here today and honoring us with your presence. My name is Henry Gonzalez. I serve as Agricultural Commissioner for the County of Monterey. Today, I'm going to introduce the crop report. After that, we're going to watch a brief video that complements the crop report. Afterwards, I'm going to ask our esteemed panel here of experts to provide us with an introductory statement about the crop report, of course, followed by your opportunity to ask us questions about some of the specifics in the crop report. And just so you'll know, at 11:45 this morning, I will be presenting the same crop report to the Board of Supervisors. 11:45 at their chamber on LSL Street. The first thing I need to do is the most important thing, I believe, and that is to recognize everyone that put this report together. As many of you know, it's one of the mandates of the Agricultural Commissioner to compile this report of the production values of our respective counties. Staff-wise, we had many staff working on the report, gathering the data, reviewing the data, putting it together. But certain individuals had a larger role, more responsibility, and devoted much more time to that. So I'm going to give them credit. Graham Hunting, our Deputy Agricultural Commissioner, he is the deputy over the program, so he gets to do most of the worrying about the production of the crop report. Shayla Neufeld, Agricultural Inspector Biologist, and Yvonne Perez, another Agricultural Inspector Biologist. Those of you that have a copy of the crop report might recognize them from the cover. That was my insistence, so. But there's many other folks to thank. I want to thank our panelists here. See if I don't mess up the names. So here, to my immediate right, we have Christopher Valadez, the new president of the Grower Shipper Association, followed by Carolyn O'Donnell, Communications Director for the California Strawberry Commission, followed by Abby Taylor-Silva, also of the Grower Shippers Association. She serves as their policy communications, Vice President of Policy and Communications. And then we have Kim Stemler, who is the Executive Director of the Monterey County Vintners and Grape Growers Association. And last but certainly not least, we have Norm Groot, the Director of the Monterey County Farm Bureau, Executive Director of the Monterey County Farm Bureau. And then we also have some very special guests here. Every year we feature something of agriculture, something related to agriculture that makes at least the idea is to make the crop report a little more interesting than just a bunch of numbers. The numbers are interesting to those of us who are involved with agriculture, but the theme really, I believe, makes it more interesting for all of us. This year we highlighted women in agriculture. And hopefully you panelists can see this. So the idea was to highlight the role of women in agriculture here in Monterey, which I don't believe has ever been done. And I believe even from our panel, you can see the women outnumber the men. And even on our team, the women outnumbered the men. Get used to it, guys. So we thought that we would focus on a small subset of all the women that work in agriculture. As we thought about this, we thought about going historical, but the more we thought about it, the more it was like, there's like way more women than we could possibly put into the report, more like a phone book of all the women that have contributed. So this is a subset, a very small subset of that group of women that we've chose to highlight in little vignettes about them and what they have to share with us. And so could we go on to that? So here they are, but I'd like to call them out individually and ask them to stand and be recognized here today. And so I want to thank them also. So let's see, Margaret Duflock here. And those of you who may not know, she is a San Bernardo Rancho advisor. Next to her is Mary O'Rodry, advisor to the O'Rodry Ranch. And right behind them is Colby Pereira. She is the manager of food safety program and regulatory compliance for Costa Farms. Sharon Benson, longtime friend and agronomist with USDA Agriculture Research. Maria Guadalupe Nunez, she's not just a farm worker, but she is also serves on the Farm Worker Advisory Committee for the Ag Commissioner's Office and is a member of the CCA. Leticia Hernandez, she's here in the back. Leticia Hernandez, she works with, she's the coordinator for FARMS, the leadership program, someone who I've come to know and appreciate. Maria Carmen Santoyo. So I have to mention that Maria Carmen Santoyo is not only a farm worker, but her son, Javier Santoyo, is one of our agricultural inspector biologists. He's not here today because he serves in the I believe the reserve, and he's on duty right now. Otherwise, I'm sure he would be here. And then we have Janet Louie. I believe I saw her here. And Janet is the manager of sales and human resources for Green Valley Floral. There's one other person who's not here, Maria de la Fuente, who is she's the director of the University of California Cooperative Extension, the farm advisors. Her office is right here, but she couldn't make it because I believe she's out of town. So I'm sure she's kicking herself right now that she's not here. But anyway, I thank you all, and you may be seated. Thank you so much for. I think your presence in the crop report provides the spice for the crop report. So anyway, now I'm going to continue with my little PowerPoint presentation and share some of the numbers with you. So I, like many of my colleagues, like to compare the numbers. Which way are we going? Are we going up or down? And it's always a little bit up, a little bit down. Generally, it's an upward trajectory because we become more and more efficient in our farming techniques, thanks to many. But see, these are some of the what we call crop groupings or categories. And it's always interesting to see how any particular category is impacting the overall numbers. I'll share that the overall number, which is always the bragging point for ag commissioners, we have a gross production value of $4.25 billion, that's billion with the B, or $4,258,629,000 of production for 2018. But in the category, we'll be able to see which of those categories are helping or maybe not so much or are struggling, as it were. Vegetables, we are very big here in vegetables. And so in vegetables, we actually went down a bit from 2017 to 2018. Fruit and nuts went up a little bit. And I'm gonna speak a little bit to the specifics of some of these categories, some of the specific commodities in these categories in a bit. Nursery crop went down, and that's one that's very concerning because It's always been very big here in the county, but for a number of reasons, it's gone down and continues to go down. Livestock and poultry went up a rather significant amount, as did field crops. And then seed crops and apiary, which is an odd mix, went down just a bit. Overall, the total went down about 3.7%, which when you look at that 3.7%, that's actually a small percent, but of a large number. It's a lot that the production went down. I do want to point out, as always, even though that's a large number, $4.25 billion, it is a gross number. From that number, farmers must pay their workers, they must pay their bills, all of them, their electricity, water, leases, trucking, you name it, everything comes out of there. And so that's not reflected in that number, but that's what that number goes out into the community. And what's also not reflected in that number is the multiplier effect that number has when all of those workers, all of those folks spend their part of that $4.2 billion. It reverberates within the community and generates additional jobs and economic activity. We've done an economic contributions report in the past. I plan to do one again using 2018 numbers, and we'll be able to see that that multiplier effect continues to the tune of approximately an additional $4 billion to the community. I always like to see what the top crops are, and so this particular slide shows that, what our top 10 crops are. If you look in the crop report, though, we actually list more like the top 20, 25. There's quite a few crops because we are so diverse, and that's what gives us primarily our strength. The first category I'd like to mention is the leaf lettuce, and it's really more of a category than an individual crop. You could mix this up differently. Part of that leaf lettuce category is butter lettuce, green leaf, red leaf, and romaine lettuce. All make up that leaf lettuce. And I'll share that the romaine lettuce took a big hit last year, primarily according to the reports we've received, primarily to the outbreaks of E. coli. The one that was reported in Yuma impacted us here. The other that was reported later in the end of the year that CDC could not determine where a source. They thought that possibly it was Santa Barbara County, but they did continue with the alert to folks not to eat romaine unless they knew where it was from. So that impacted us significantly, romaine being one of our top commodities and one of my favorite salads. Strawberries, again, continues to be strong here in Monterey County, second in standing. And if you look at all of the crops on the top 10, they're all the same crops. They just changed positions a little bit. I'm not going to speak more about the top 10, but I did want to share them with you, the top 10 as they are. And you'll see that in value, some went up, some went down, which is typically what happens with these numbers. We go on to the next slide, please. We thought we'd show how organic production continues to move upwards here in the county. Of note is the number of acres that increased from 2017 to 2018. That's a significant amount. That's about 28,000 acres, which is significant. And what that means is 3 years ago, a lot of folks decided to go all in on organic production. But you see the value didn't go up that much. Not sure what all happened there, but it's interesting to me that the acreage has increased so much. We'll see if that trend continues at that level, at that rate. So next slide. To me, this was one of the more significant numbers that came out. If you look at this list for wine grape production, you'll see that 2018 was the best year production value-wise for wine grapes here in the county. We've had other really good years, but 2018 was the best year for wine grapes here in the county, and I'm sure Kim will be able to tell us a little more about that in a bit. But at this point, I would like to show the video, followed by the panel again with their introductory comments, and then we'll all take questions from you all up here as panelists.
As kids, we were really lucky. We got to grow up working on the ranch. We got to work in the office. We were exposed to a lot of different aspects of agriculture, which was really awesome. It exposed me to an industry and gave me a lot of different perspective on what I was going to be interested in working in the future. And of course, the obvious choice was agriculture.
When I was growing up, I was told I'm going to go to college, and I figured I would not be coming home to work in the family business. It was, for the three of us, a lot of hard work. My parents never took vacations. They had us work all our summer vacations after school, especially during Mother's Day when there was a big crop. We'd come in and help. So the thought of actually taking over or actually working for my parents' business was not thinkable at the time.
Over the 40 years that I've been involved in agriculture, I definitely have seen more women get into agriculture and accept more leadership roles.
I graduated from ag engineering back in the 80s, and since then, so almost 40 years, I've been dealing and working with agriculture.
My dad was very supportive of me going to Davis and being an ag econ major, and I sort of just followed his advice, but it wasn't necessarily what I was interested in. I always liked economics. But once I got there and I kind of bounced around theater and journalism and other things that I really liked, I found that I kept sort of falling back into agriculture and into groups of people who were involved in agriculture. And then my skills that I'd built up in theater and communications were good. You know, ag communications is a big deal, and ag policy is a big deal. And so I just was able to find kind of that perfect meshing of my worlds in this position and the positions I've held, and was really inspired by my family.
My favorite part of working in agriculture is being outdoors, watching the plants grow, and helping the researchers solve problems for production agriculture in Monterey County.
I love working in agriculture because I get to interact with all sorts of people, you know, academics, laymen, workers, growers, volunteers, etc., and that gives me a lot of satisfaction, making sure that working with people, interacting with what agriculture provides to you, which is, you know, dealing with plants and soil, feeds my soul. Every day is different because plants, they require and demand different type of tending to them. If it rains or if it's sunshine, whatever, plants still keep on growing, and you still need to tend to them. So every day is not the same as the other.
What I enjoy is I get to work in a family business. I get to be involved in it from more than just the employee stand. So I am actually responsible for 40 other families of employees that work for us. So it really kind of brings me whole with work and family together.
My favorite part of working in agriculture is just it is such deeply rooted in this community and this valley of which I grew up in and have the ability to work in every day. Waking up and going into my job There's so much purpose in agriculture. Every day brings different things to the table. You're constantly learning. The industry itself is evolving and changing. So it's so fun to be able to get to keep the values that were instilled in you, from previous generations, but also learn to adapt to the changing industry. It's really exciting.
Just talking from the programs that I work with, it is very interesting that 90% of the staff, from field workers to directors of the operations, are women.
For women looking to begin a career in agriculture, I would tell them say yes to as many opportunities as you can and keep doing those until you've learned what you feel like you have and can from those. Make sure there's someone else to take them and then say yes to the next level. I think that it's really important that we as women believe in ourselves, that we can continue to learn and grow. I think it's important that you never get completely comfortable, that you really continue to challenge yourself.
Agriculture itself entails a lot of long hours. It takes patience. We have to anticipate what Mother Nature will bring. There's a lot of risk involved. We accept that because we've been doing it so long. If that's not in your palate, then it's probably not for you. It's not a guaranteed way of living. We actually can do it, and we've proven that we've done it. I look at my 40 employees as employees with families, and I protect and actually promote those families as well. And I have to basically make this business work for not only my family, but also their families.
I would tell other women who are starting their careers in agriculture that the possibilities are really endless in this industry. The industry is changing and it's really evolving every day. A lot of people think that being involved in agriculture means that you actually have to be involved with the production or the harvest activity every day. That's not the case. There's so many external things that agriculture touches, and there's so much opportunity to get involved. We're talking about policy making, we're talking about ag education, we're talking about teaching. Like I said, the possibilities are just endless. I would encourage all young people, especially women, to just get out and get involved and find those things that really speak to your heart and you have genuine interest in.
Well, early on, I would say the biggest challenges to women in agriculture was that there were so few of us. And so that meant that there weren't very many role models or mentors, and that's very important to anyone who needs to get into their career.
Some of my female role models in agriculture would definitely have to be my grandmother, my mom, and my aunt. I mentioned being able to ride along with my grandfather at an early age, but my grandmother was right there alongside him getting the farm started all those years ago. That was really unique for that time. She had equal say and she was right there alongside. And again, my mom and my aunt, they were out in the fields too, just like my uncles, helping move pipe, driving equipment, and that was a really powerful message that was instilled at me from a really young age as a young woman, that there was nothing that was too difficult to overcome and that they had really paved the way for opportunities for myself and other female members of not only our family, but of female members of this entire valley and community to get involved in our industry.
Mentorships are very important, and I've had wonderful mentors that are men and women, but since this is about women, I'm going to call out a few of the women. There are people in your life who open your eyes to experiences and ideas that you would never have come across otherwise, and also who see you and see your potential and really just support you to others. They give you some of their positional power and bring it so that you have some of what they have. And there are people like Darlene Din and Lori Coster, Kay Felice, just wonderful women in our industry who have believed in me and have done that for me. And I really think that I and other women need to really be thinking as this next generation comes through, we need to do that for them.
For the future, I would say it's just wide open. I mean, there's so many different avenues that women can get involved in nowadays. I think maybe technology is one area that women would be excellent at.
Something that I've been in touch all my life, this type of mantra that we need to feed our three parts of our person, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And that's why I decided agriculture does it for me, and I hope it does it for a lot of you.
Monterey County is the best place to live. You can't beat it. And I say raising a family here is ideal as well. I wouldn't have given this up for anything.
What a great, beautiful video. Getting emotional just watching that. It's very beautiful. Very, I believe, appropriate tribute for women in agriculture. Thank you. Thank you for participating in the creation of it. So at this point, I'd like to have the give an introductory remarks, however they like, and then from the audience and from the press that are here. And again, we'll be available, at least some of us, I hope, will be available for interviews afterwards. And so why don't we start with Norm.
All right, good, woo. Back this away. Okay, good morning, everyone. You know, as an advocate for agriculture, I've been saying for many years at this press conference that farming truly is a gamble from year to year. And each year's crop report depends on market pricing, consumer trends, the climate and weather, and of course production supply. And last year's farm gate really reflects the market volatility that farmers do experience. And much of that volatility is beyond the control of the farmer. Labor availability, weather, costs of inputs and supplies, pests and diseases, these all impact the yields of crops from year to year. But when a market recall happens, such as what we experienced with romaine this last year, the impacts are far more measurable and the farm gate suffers. Because of the romaine safety recalls, Monterey County farmers saw romaine sales fall by 24%. If you think about that, any other business that experiences a 24% decline in 1 year would find that catastrophic and maybe even possibly unsustainable. Yet our farmers continue to grow, and they continue to grow romaine in hopefully a rebounding market here in 2019. So overall, leafy green production dropped by 12%, mainly due to these market fluctuations and the food safety recalls. But spinach continues to climb higher, with production numbers up 6% in 2018, rebounding from the 2008 food safety recall. And near and dear to my heart, being a former horticulturalist, is the drop in nursery products, which continues, to be impacted by the continuing lifestyle changes of consumer preferences, gardening as a lifestyle, and consolidations within the wholesale nursery industry. Bedding plants and potting plants saw the steepest declines here as younger consumers shy away from gardening as a hobby. But we have highlights of other vegetable crops. We have increases in artichokes of 7%, asparagus 2.5%, cauliflower 2.5%, and kale 4%. And this tends to balance out the decreases that we saw in lower levels of production for broccoli, celery, and mushrooms. And caneberry showed a decline of 19%, which really is a reflection maybe of market supply and fluctuations in the market itself. I think one of the things to note here is that there was an increase in bean production by 93%. And beans are still a minor crop here, and this may be a trendsetter as we see labor supplies continue to tighten here, and crops like beans becoming much more sustainable. Livestock production continues to thrive here in Monterey County, and with slight increases in cattle values, and apiary continues to grow, showing a 41% increase this past year. And the huge jump in organic production acreage, up 28,000 acres. That's a significant number. Trade and exports remain important elements of the local farming economy here, but significantly off our peak of 2016 by 49%. Trade with Canada decreased 30% in 2018, while with Mexico we increased 44%. And China remains less than 1% of our fresh export market, with a decrease of 475% year over year, and that's probably related to the tariffs that were put in place this last year. But the importance of access to international markets still remains a strategic value for our farmers here. Overall, Monterey County farming and ranching remains very resilient, and it's due to the wide variety of different crops that we produce that balance out some of these market fluctuations. And 2018 will be remembered most significantly for what we went through with the romaine lettuce shortfall, showing that farmers indeed are subject to impacts well beyond their control. Thank you.
So wine grapes had the best year they've ever had last year. We actually, 2018, just call it Mother Nature wanted more grape wine. The yield was abundant. The yield was abundant throughout the state, actually, and the quality is amazing. 2018 vintage is going to be remarkable. The wines are coming out really, really beautiful. Try some rosé right now. Oh, so elegant. So our crop ranking, because we had such a successful year, went up from number 6 in the county to number 5. And I'm going to talk about numbers because ag commissioners like to brag. So I'm going to give Henry some bragging points, okay? Well, in this county, our largest varietals our largest value varietals by value, Pinot Noir actually brings in the most amount of money with about $89 million in sales. That represents 36% of our value of our crop. That's significant. Chardonnay represents 33% and brings in around $82 million. And then right under that is Cab, which nobody ever guesses because we have a thermal rainbow in Monterey County and the southern parts and Cachagua are very hot. So we can grow some great Cabernet Sauvignon. And that's around 24 million. So, and then by tonnage, Chardonnay we actually grow more of. Pinot Noir has a higher value. Chardonnay we grow more of. And then the next crop is Pinot Noir. Now in the state, here we go, Henry, we produce more Pinot Noir than any other county in the state. We think we produce more Chardonnay than anybody in the state, but we'll get back to you on that. We just need to work a little bit to confirm those numbers. And then there's a bunch of other crops, a bunch of other varietals. Gewürztraminer, Gruner Veltliner, so good. And one of my favorites, if you have not tried this, Pinot Blanc. We grow more Pinot Blanc than anybody else. And then also Cabernet, I'm sorry, I cannot see. Norm is really smart. He prints his words really big, but I can't. I'm going to do that next year. So, Cabernet Franc. And Cabernet Franc is really hot right now, and we're growing more of that than anybody else. So enjoy Monterey wines.
All right, well, I just want to shout out and say, Henry, I really liked the way that you called out the gross production value because I think that is something I'm going to use. I think it's so important as we look at this. It's, this is not profit, this is not net. And those numbers really do represent everything it's taking to continue to sustain agriculture, which is buying tractors and buying irrigation equipment and all the crop inputs and paying your employees and workers' compensation and all of these things that lead to us having, you know, a head of lettuce to buy at the grocery store. So I really like how you talked about that. And I think that also helps us to, you know, we talk about what the contributions of agriculture are locally. I'm really excited to see that you're going to update that report. That original report in 2014 showed that agriculture is the #1 employer in our county with about 20% of all jobs. And so that has a tremendous impact on our community as a whole. And, you know, these numbers are all a part of that. I think that the other thing that's interesting about this report is continuing to see leaf lettuce, you know, at the top of the report. You know, more and more of us today like to see romaines and leaf lettuces in our salads. And I think that, you know, the words that Norm said about the outbreak are true. But I think it's also important to remember that the industry is taking that very seriously. And actually, I'm leaving this meeting, and I think maybe a few others in the room are leaving this meeting to go to a technical committee meeting with the LGMA today to talk about how we're going to take new metrics that were adopted after these outbreaks specific to water and implement them into the audits that the LGMA conducts and has been conducting for over a decade. And so the industry really is constantly changing. I came back from a conference in Texas last week where, you know, new research is coming through all the time that's helping us to understand food safety as it's going to constantly evolve. You know, we're going to continue to learn, and I just wanted to make sure that this group knows that the industry is very committed to that learning. And finally, I think it's interesting to see some of the changes in the crops as they're moving up in the ranking. You know, I had a cauliflower crusted pizza last night, and I think that it's fun to see how a lot of the crops that we've grown for a long time are now being used in different ways. We have, you know, broccoli. The stem of the broccoli is now being shredded and used in bags. We are using broccoli leaves as a treat now. So it's interesting. The industry is continuing to evolve, and I think you see that reflected here. And finally, I just want to say what an honor it was to be highlighted in this report and to be showcased alongside so many of you and people who I've grown up with and looked up to for many years, like Margaret and Mary. So I just thank you for including me in that. It's very, very special.
Well, I get to talk about #2, so it's kind of like the Avis of the crop in the Monterey. So strawberries, the trends that are shown in the report here kind of reflect the statewide trends as well in terms of we're seeing declining acreage, but we're seeing increasing production. And everyone's kind of going, well, how does that happen if you've got less acres? Well, there's a couple things that are working in conjunction to that declining acreage. We're seeing newer varieties that are being developed that are producing more fruit per acre. So those little plants that are out there, they're churning out more berries per plant than maybe some of the older varieties you've seen. Also, labor tends to be a challenge for strawberries. It's a hand-planted, hand-weeded, hand-harvested, hand-packed crop. And so you're sometimes limited by the amount of hands that you have available to you to help you to tend and bring that crop in. So that also is a challenge that strawberry farmers are facing. That said, the Monterey Bay area is the best place in the world to grow strawberries. The coast of California is, but particularly this Monterey Bay, we have a very long season of warm days and cool nights. We'd have a very long spell where we don't have a lot of rain, which can damage the berries. And so I encourage you to go to the market and just enjoy the bounty because you are in the best place. Strawberries are grown all over the world. Often they're in greenhouses or hydroponics or some other modified atmosphere, but we get to grow them out in our dirt and our sunshine because we do have the best weather here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Henry, for the opportunity. And first, I want to start with a compliment to you and the county and the staff and the committee that was put together to help build this report. And my first compliment is basically what you did not highlight. And I say that coming over from the San Joaquin Valley, where the rush is always to talk about where do you fit within the overall context of the state in your overall gross value, right? Like who's #1, who's #2. You talk about counties like Fresno, Tulare, Kern. That's the jogging that happens there. And instead, you pivoted. You did something different that I think is more relational as it relates to what is Monterey County's agricultural value. I think that's connecting agriculture to the people. You look at the story like Colby, Abby, others in the room. You have multi-generational families, multi-generational operations that have worked tirelessly to connect agriculture to the public and to identify what ag's value is. And I think your report does that. And it does it beautifully because it humanizes something that's very difficult to humanize, and that's numbers, that's statistics. And so the report story is not necessarily, to me, in my perspective, of what's number 1 or what's number 25 on your list ranking, but it's the humanized value of agriculture and what its significance is, not only for the entire state, but specifically for this county. So first and foremost, I will compliment you on identifying key stories for women in agriculture who are leaders, multi-generational leaders representing multi-generational operations throughout this county. However, if I were to focus on a number, and I won't focus on what the number says, but what I believe the number means and what the significance of the number is, it's where you've left off. So if I look at the acreage story, declining acreage, and you've heard the story up here from my colleagues, but it's the significance of the indicator in here, the consumer price index or interval, and what that means. And you have that interval in here leaving off in 2008, and perhaps it's not yet ready to attribute or associate what that means for the values in 2018. But if you're looking at what it is, in essence, it's the average change in prices paid for a market basket sample of food over a period of time. Here, the county has from 98 to 2008, but doesn't have any numbers for 2018. So I looked it up to see what it might look like of taking that entire 20-year period, averaging it out using national statistics provided by the Bureau of Labor Statistics just for fresh vegetables alone. And I think it tells a pretty compelling story. So over that 20-year period of time, you know what the change is for 20 years in terms of the prices paid on average by the consumer for food? Less than 3%. About 2.5% is the average over the years. Now, year to year, it might fluctuate larger or smaller, but over that 20-year period, 2.5%. So you have an industry, by and large, and the people behind the industry that continue to provide nutritious, affordable food to the public for us to consume. There's more pressure onto this industry today than comparison to 1998, just looking at the suite of regulatory and legislative pressures that make it harder to be highly efficient and highly productive, yet they're doing it. They're more efficient, they're more productive, and oh, by the way, on significantly less acres. And if you look at this report for the county alone, comparing 2008 to 2018, you've dropped about 50,000 acres. So regardless of the increases in organics and regardless of the wonderful stories where numerically we like to assign positive value because of growth or increase, acres have decreased in this county, yet we're highly efficient and highly productive. I think that's significant because what this all means to me is not just numbers in a booklet, but it's what does it mean to the ability to connect ag to the consumer and the ability to the consumer to understand the value of ag. And quite frankly, where you left off is 2.5%. It's the affordability of food. It's the availability of nutritious food that we can't take for granted. It's the ability of these operations here to, I think, work more cohesively and intelligently to withstand the pressures from the general public to be able to continue to produce that food. And so I may be reading too much into this report, but I think it says a lot because it's humanized the value of agriculture, and I think the numbers specifically with Consumer Price Index really tell a story about the ability to produce food regularly, make it easily available, and to make it as productive and as efficient as possible, as these businesses have done by employing and adopting new technologies and by investing in the people that make up this entire industry throughout the county and beyond. So if anything, Henry, I hope this report, and I think what you said, seasoning, the flavor, the context, the significance of this report, I hope it can serve as a model for other counties, quite frankly, and the state of California when it puts together their statistical analysis of all the counties for a given year, that we're maybe focusing less in time over what number 1 means or doesn't mean, but we're talking about how can we humanize these statistics and make them real in the context of how the general public understands agriculture. And thank you for that.
Thank you, Chris, and everyone for your comments. So I'd like to open it up to the audience, to the press, if they would like to ask any questions. Yes, sir. And if you could direct it to who you'd like to ask.
Well, it's an open question because it's not here.
Yes.
Where's cannabis in all
I'll take that one. Cannabis is not in here for a number of reasons. One, probably the primary reason is that the state's track and trace part of the cannabis regulatory program is not fully in place, and so to gather numbers it would be challenging for us. And there are issues at the federal level because it is still considered a Schedule I drug by the federal government. So because this report is utilized by the federal government in times of emergency and when they're issuing grants and other funding to counties for disasters and whatnot, the concern is that having that number in here would impact that. And there is legislation right now sponsored by Monterey County that would allow agricultural commissioners to include, if they so chose, cannabis numbers in their crop report as an addendum to the crop report. So it would be separate. So we would still have all of our traditional crops here. There would be the total of that, and then separate from that, we can choose to or not to include cannabis. So that's why cannabis is not in there. For me, I'd rather wait for the track and trace to be in place so that we have a number that is considered statewide as accurate. Other questions?
I have a question about lack of farm workers. You know, it's been an issue all year round. So in which way that kind of problem has been an impact on your industry?
I'm going to touch on earlier.
Can you repeat that a little louder? I'm not sure we all heard that up
The
here.
lack of farm workers because of immigration, Trump, they're not working anymore. There's people that need really farm workers and they're not finding them. So the lack of farm workers has been affecting the industry, and in which way?
I think for this excuse me.
Push the button. Is it on?
It's great.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Depends on your perspective, but I think if you're speaking from the perspective of attempting to advance and keep ag sustainable, county and statewide specifically, you have to look at the state of play on immigration reform and the federal policy debate. I think we've all been on the record in trying to push to ensure that you can create a reasonable, workable future flow program that breeds life and maintains consistency and the recognized value of keeping guest workers coming into the United States, because you don't have enough of a domestic labor force just here in the county or statewide or nationally to produce, to be employed and to do the labor-intensive work that's required here in the agricultural sector. Those pressure points are going to continue, and I believe for communities like those throughout the county, you're going to continue to see the results of those pressure points in other areas, whether it's housing impacts or other impacts that, quite frankly, this is a ground zero for many areas for not having enough workers or enough of a resident workforce. There is a reliance upon bringing in guest workers from other countries under the H-2A visa program to help satisfy that need. And even at that, in the burdens that are riddled throughout that visa program, that is not even a foolproof way to ensure you can meet 100% of your agricultural labor need. And so you do have examples of some fields, some parts of field that go unharvested because of the inability to secure enough workers to do the job.
I'll echo some of those things that Chris just said, but also add that, we've been working on this issue for 15, 16, 17 years. Whoa. Now I'm yelling. We've been working on this for 15, 16, 17 years as part of a national coalition to advance immigration reform policy. And we're getting nowhere. There's a number of different things against us here in Monterey County, the cost of living here and the lack of affordable housing or housing in general, and also the lack of a guest worker program or a temporary worker program that works for specialty crops in California that allows transferability between employers and has reasonable requests for housing, transportation, et cetera. So we're trying to work through that as best we can, and the unfortunate problem we have is that most of our crops are hand harvested, and so we need a lot of hands. We need 45,000 pairs of hands every year to harvest our crops. And so we're kind of stuck in the middle here. And I know a lot of research at the Strawberry Commission has gone into mechanical harvesting, and a lot of other practices in other crops and harvesting have gone through research, but we just don't have those solutions in place that are sustainable yet. So we are still relying on labor, and until we have a better structure of policy from Washington, D.C., we're kind of at the mercy of what's going to happen in our national policy.
Right, and if I can add from a Strawberry perspective, we are seeing increasing dependency on H-2A workers, which are a guest worker program that has a lot of requirements. Agencies, not just one agency that oversees it, has to go through it. They still can't quite fill all those jobs yet. So you'll often see that farmers are doing that calculus about how many acres they can plant against how many workers they think they can reasonably get and bring that harvest in. For strawberry farmers, they're going to be planting in November, which means they started planning now for next year's crop. So they have to kind of figure into that calculus already how many workers they think they can secure for that crop. So you are seeing them really trying to plan ahead, and that is also helping to contribute to the decline in acreage with strawberries as well, is that you don't see that. Norm mentioned the automation efforts. The California Strawberry Commission is in joint partnership with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. We have a strawberry center down there doing research on a number of different issues, anything from disease resistance in different varieties, different kinds of managing different pest pressures and different plant diseases. But there's also a whole section that's incorporating the engineering program and engineering students within Cal Poly to really look at what are the ways that we can solve some of the problems there. The problem is that you don't want to destroy the plant. We're not harvesting lettuce or something where you just take the whole plant. You want that plant to be intact for 9 months. So you need something that can identify a ripe berry from a leaf, from a flower, from a not quite ripe berry, and then be able to pick it at a pressure that doesn't bruise it, and then be able to pack it or put it somewhere so that another hands can pack it. But there are a number of different issues that are, they're trying to solve each one of those issues along the way. You may see some machinery out in the field right now. They're mostly harvest aids. It's taking those berries from those plants and putting them in the containers are still being done by human hands, and probably will be for a little while yet.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Association. So at this point, when you hear how Napa do you think of Napa? How close is Monterey County to taking over Napa?
I honestly don't think I don't think anyone here ever thinks we'll take over Napa. So, and I imagine by taking over Napa, you mean like in renown.
Just, top
Yeah,
of mind.
yeah, top of them. I really think Napa has done such a great job at promoting themselves and being known for wine that honestly, we don't feel the pressure to take over Napa. We are a very different growing region than Napa. Napa is king of Cabernet Sauvignon, and even though that's our third largest crop here, we do much better with the cooler growing crops. We are the queens of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So in that way, we don't necessarily compete with Napa as much as one would think. 60%, 66% of our crop are cool growing crops that Napa does not excel in. And I think when you think of Napa also now, you think of infrastructure, you think of hotels, you think of, these, I'm looking at Jose who just came down from Napa to be the assistant commissioner. You think of lots of chateaus and restaurants. And honestly, in Monterey wine country, when you think of the Salinas Valley where 92% of the grapes are grown, there is not that infrastructure. And I think there will be an increase in visitor-friendly infrastructure, but I don't think we will ever be Napa, and I don't know that we really want to be either, and I don't see anybody in the industry craving to be Napa at all.
So we do Pinot Noir and Chardonnay better than Napa, though?
Oh, gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to say that? Yes, we do Pinot Noir and Chardonnay better. At least I can say we grow more. And personally, I encourage everyone to do blind taste test of different regions. It's really fun. Compare the same varietal from different regions and figure out what you like. I consistently like Monterey varietals better. Monterey, yeah. So if you want to try that, we can set that up.
We should do that.
Yeah, we should do that. We could do it with the whole room. Next ag report.
Any other questions? Felix?
This may be a question for everyone, but any thoughts or concerns how new tariffs imposed this year might impact this year's yields?
Well, I get that question a lot from the media, and every time a new tariff is proposed, and particularly related to China, I get the phone calls. China, as I said, is a very minor market for our fresh products here, and maybe Kim can answer a little more related to wine. But any market, I think, that we're looking at that we export to where they increase tariffs is going to have an impact. And so whether it's Canada, Mexico, or whether it's China, or the world now, India, we're going to see something happen. And so product, if we're still doing international sales, and that's why I think international access to markets, and even particularly the EU, is very important. And so we need to continue negotiating trade agreements that make sense for agriculture and keep on the table when we're renegotiating some of these trade, particularly here on our continent.
I can speak for strawberries in terms of, because they're a very perishable crop, pretty much exports go where they can be trucked. So that's mostly North America. Canada is by far the largest export destination for fresh California strawberries. Mexico comes behind. We know that Mexican berries come in during the winter, also strawberries that are imported into the U.S. when California production is low. For China, California strawberries had just gotten market access to China about 3 years ago. We had just been kind of testing out the inspection protocols and making sure that their cold chain infrastructure is in place. So with the imposition of the additional tariffs, there were tariffs to begin with, and the additional tariffs, we're basically not seeing any strawberries going to China. But it was a really minuscule amount before.
So we have most of the large wine companies in the country actually growing wine in this county. And from a statewide perspective, they are all affected by tariffs in China. And in general, the wine industry is, if we look at the international wine industry, it is very unfair for American wine because most other countries, their governments support the international exportation of wine. You know, why can we buy Italian and Spanish varietals here, wine here, so inexpensively? It's because their governments are paying for a lot of that. Our government does not. The tariff for wine is incredible right now in China. So it has been seen as an emerging market over the last few years, so I don't think we see that much damage because it's something that as a state we're still feeling out. And actually the Chinese in general don't have a strong palate for wine yet. They have a palate for sweeter wines. They're just starting to grow and change their palate. So it's more of something that is slowing down the emergence of the value of Chinese wine sales.
And I'll add, you know, the impact from trade disruption, whether tariffs are the tool or other messages, it's also market windows. And you can even look at domestic production and the production windows here to make fresh produce, for example, available throughout the continental U.S. You know, if you have trade disruption in key markets where typically you're already pre-assigning a certain percentage of your production portfolio to go offshore, across the border, or overseas, and you have disruption because an importer is now paying a higher tariff, passing on that cost, right, to the consumer, that's decreasing sales if consumers are turned off from a higher price at their retail or wholesale outlets. Then you have more supply here in the domestic market, which can create sometimes a glut in the market window, and that can drive down prices. And so you have a pricing impact here domestically as a result of something that's happening in terms of who's actually paying more. It's the importer that's paying more for the market that you typically send X amount of product to, but now they're paying more, sales are less, you have more product here that you have to move, you have this window that you have to move it within, and now there's more supply for a window that's just become a heck of a lot tighter. And oh, by the way, you're competing now because you disrupt these market windows. More crops are coming on, so now you have more crops that typically there might be arguably some sweet spots on how much of a population of a given commodity is available domestically. Now you just have more supply overall, and you have commodities which typically didn't domestically are now competing with each other, not only for consumer attention, but most notably for shelf space at retail. Drives prices down. Folks are hurt here that are domestic producers, and it has a domino effect, all because of a tariff, which you think of, okay, importer pays. That is true, importer does pay, but you can disrupt windows severely where you're driving prices down because of too much supply here in the domestic market. That's a fact, and that's something that we as industry representatives have to continue to implore our political officials, decision makers to be very sensitive to, because while we want new markets to be able to create more diversity and shift product, we have to ensure that as stewards of organizations and their interests that are making food available affordably to consumers here, that we're avoiding that type of market disruption that can occur very quickly and has because of something that's going on between the United States and China or other countries.
Thank you. Other questions? No? Well, I want to again, una pregunta. She has a question. For example, producing all or presenting all of the values. If we're not concerned with this administration impacting and lowering the economy. For example, yesterday where I work, because of concern of the migrant raids, in all the crews, were up to 15 people were missing from the crews. Like I'm a mom, she depends on me. We're afraid to go out to work. And also for you, because the economy can go down. And the crops will perish. So in this case, what can be done? I don't understand English that well, but I've tried to learn, but I can't. I speak Spanish, and I struggle for myself and for others. Gracias, Maria. I'm tempted to answer in Spanish, but I will. María, yo sé que tu inglés está igual de mucho como mi español, pero deja decirle que varios de los panelistas ya han respondido a esa misma pregunta, hablando no directamente del presidente, porque quizás todos no quieran nombrarlo, pero ya han reconocido la misma batalla que tenemos con lo que está sucediendo con las tarifas y lo que está sucediendo en la frontera también. Esos son problemas que ellos han reconocido y están tratando de mejorar la situación, pero como todos hemos visto, es una batalla y no se va a terminar aquí pronto, pero la lucha se le hace. Estamos, en ese caso, estamos todos haciendo la misma lucha. So I created you guys were having already addressed her questions about and more specifically about the what's happening at the border and with the tariffs issues.
Well, I would just add that this is the continued mixed
message of rhetoric that we get from Washington, D.C. that we constantly have to deal with. On one hand, we're told we have to hire legal laborers, we have to go through H-2A, which is a very tough, bureaucratic, expensive, hard process for employers to get through. And yet, we get all this rhetoric from Washington, D.C. that really isn't fair to those who are here because we have a loophole in our prior laws. And so we need to straighten that out, and that's why we've worked for 15, 16, 17 years in Washington, D.C. and come close a couple of times, but it's really a failure on the part of our elected officials in Congress to put together a policy that makes sense and reforms our immigration laws so that we can deal with the people who are here, the dreamers and all the others that we need to basically at this point document and make sure, because they're part of our communities, and we need to make sure that they are safe and that they feel safe in our communities. So this is an ongoing problem, and every time this happens in the media where we see another tweet, it provokes another response, and we try and get as much of a message out to everyone, including all the employers, that you need to reassure your employees that they have rights, that they can look at this in a different perspective rather than being scared by what they hear.
I would add, you know, your story about
fellow colleagues, fellow coworkers, becoming concerned because of a message from the president and staying home or avoiding being visible because of fear that they might have a dangerous or concerning interaction with federal law enforcement. I think that's a real story that should be told. I think it's best told by you and by others who are seeing the firsthand impact. I mean, you are a forewoman. You manage crews. You see the impacts as it relates not only to the company you work for and production or the ability to manage and operate the operation, but also to just the culture and the climate and the inability to, I think, regain the trust within the community that you know, folks can come back out and folks can continue to be productive members of the county or of our culture. And so what I would suggest, whether for you or your colleagues or any others, you know, there is an opportunity to identify, you know, how messages like that from the president have a negative impact onto the community, particularly the farming operations that you serve, and through your firsthand experience as a forewoman. You know, the president's right-hand person in agriculture, Secretary Sonny Perdue, is going to be in Watsonville this Friday at 9 a.m. for a town hall that is open to everybody. There is no, you know, secret list here. This is a public town hall for everybody to participate in. I can only imagine that the general media will be covering it, and I think, you know, we're going to talk about, you know, technology and immigration reform and all the other issues that we believe we deal with from an operational perspective on behalf of the companies and the farming families that we represent. I think it's the story about the significance of one message in social media and how that has a very real impact onto you and your colleagues in a way that's damaging to your community and to the operation that you happen to work for. That's a message that I would look to convey to the secretary, but it's very powerful coming from you because you're living it more directly. That's a firsthand story for you, and there's an opportunity to do so this week. And so I would encourage the public here. We depend upon agriculture. We're talking about the largesse or the value of agriculture. But if you want to get down to disruptions and talking about disruptions in a present day context, there is no better example than the one you've just raised. Thank you.
Yes. Nicolás Ledesma. In regards to what Maria was saying, very difficult for the family because trying to bring a lot of labor. It's costing growers more than those of us who are already here many years, resident, non-resident. Their pay, their salary, their housing, where Maria has to pay all of her own costs. I recently retired, but I had to go back to work. He's got to support his family.
Entonces, todo eso, ellos llevan todo de ganar.
So they have everything to gain.
Pero como nosotros ya tenemos años,
But we have years
20,
here,
30, 40 años trabajando,
20, 30, 40
ya
years.
dejamos nuestra vida allí.
Our life is
No
here.
hemos tenido absolutamente ningún
We've never
beneficio de
had
nada.
any benefits.
Porque lo que gana uno,
Because what we earn is go to the rent,
de los carros, porque tiene que manejar uno.
car payments.
Entonces, son $250 lo que gasta uno de gas en la semana.
So $250 for gas
Los otros
a week.
250 tiene que por otra semana. So, ¿qué gana uno?
Yeah.
Nada. Y todos los que vienen, que traen para levantar las
And
cosechas,
all the H-2A
les dan
workers,
todo, hermano, porque no pagan ni impuestos.
because they don't pay taxes,
Ellos agarran su cheque
they
100%.
get 100% of their paycheck.
Entonces, yo pienso que todos los rancheros,
So I think the growers,
compañías,
companies,
toda la persona trabajadora que tiene 20, 30 años
who've been here for 20, 30 years,
trabajando, documento, yo pienso
who
que todos
undocumented,
los que tienen más derecho de darles su visa a esas
who
personas,
should have priority to get a visa
traer gente de allá.
instead of bringing people from
Los que están levantando,
with
están
H-2A.
levantando la mesa a todos.
Uh,
Generar el trabajo. Gracias.
Gracias.
I guess the one thing that I would add from the advocacy work that we've worked on and we continue to work on is, the resident workforce is a priority. I think what we saw with, the last legislative debate on a bill that actually passed out of committee, the House Judiciary Committee, which became known as the Ag Act, sponsored by then House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte. I think the hold up that prevented that bill from moving forward within its own House of origin amongst House Republicans, right? Which you think there'd be more sensitivity towards just what do some businesses want some of the time to make themselves as operationally effective as possible. That really wasn't the holdup. What held that legislation up, I think, was concern from amongst many in the industry, particularly most out west, that we can't think that primarily all we can do is address the questions about guest workers if we don't settle on how do we first and primarily address the status of those who have been here and want to continue to be here and be productive in agriculture. And so, whether I'm speaking on behalf of the organization I used to represent or the organization that I represent today, our first and foremost priority on any federal policy measure is making sure that we're taking care of the resident workforce. It's not just about being a worker or an employee. I mean, you're part of the fabric. You've lived here. This is home. Your families are here. We need you here. We want people here. We want to secure the resident workforce first and foremost. However, because we also have a worker shortage in that there is not enough there's not enough employees from just within the state of California to fill the jobs in California alone, we are forced to use the available channel to secure more workers, which is the H-2A visa program. And so I would agree. I don't think you will see organizations that represent California agriculture supporting legislation if it does not include a workable program for those who have been in this country that have and that will continue for a period of time so that they choose to work in agriculture. That's priority number one. And if we can't settle there, then there is a no-go. And in some ways that's unfortunate because we have not been able to move the ball closer to getting a solution. Some of that is out of our control. Much of it utilizes the agricultural worker as a political football, quite honestly. We're just a piece of the issue. We're the symbol for whatever is wrong throughout society, which we know isn't right. But what we can guarantee to you is that to the extent we have a voice on policy, we will talk about protecting the resident workforce first and foremost. But I appreciate your concern because we need to know the perspective from the community within in terms of how they perceive the debate and how they perceive those who advocate and what they prioritize, whether that's guest worker over the resident workforce. And that's critical to know because that's the type of message that you and that we have to communicate to our legislators to ensure that they understand first and foremost it's about keeping our communities intact and whole here.
Thank you, Chris. Any more questions? If not, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the panel for their generous amount of time they've given us here and their answers to some pretty complex and difficult questions. So again, I'd like to invite you all, if you can, if you're interested in hearing the presentation to the Board of Supervisors. That should be at approximately 11:45. But anyway, with that, I want to conclude and thank you again very much.